see. The last time I went live on this shit. Let me see. Go live for 60 minutes. One more step before you can. All my features locked. That's crazy. Unlock co-host. Go live to no live. I've been live for so they restarted my whole live thing. That's crazy. They restarted the whole live thing. Let's see this. Pro text ball. Let's see this. Right, I want to go over this whole thing about the DNA. So the people always talking about DNA tests, right? And something I was looking into that to me, a lot of this stuff was not making any sense, right? So, as far as like Black American DNA, right? People always say that Black American people, right? Hold up, let me put this down. Right? Everybody always say that Black American people, they, from West Africa, they carry mostly West African DNA. And this whole thing about people having indigenous ancestry is not as big as people might think, right? And as far as DNA tests don't support these claims, right? They say DNA tests don't support these claims that Black American people are indigenous or carry a certain amount of indigenous DNA. So as far as like going into this whole thing about African DNA, because there was something I was wondering when I was going into like the ethnic group breakdown in some of these places, right? The first thing that came to me, right, was how come that tribes, right? How come that tribes can't be broken down when it comes to this whole indigenous people thing? Pardon me, when it comes to this whole having West African DNA. Now, as you can see on this thing, right, it says DNA tests can't tell you what tribe you are from because why can't DNA test tell African tribe, right? It said DNA tests can't tell you what tribe you are from because people in Africa today are descended from different populations with different DNA. For example, African Americans, right, which are Black Americans, right? For example, African Americans are a mix of many different African ethnic groups, and no one is an ancestor from the past. Most people have multiple ethnic and ancestral backgrounds, and ethnicity is a socio-cultural factor that changes over time. So, basically, for example, right, they're saying that it's hard to pinpoint what African tribe or West African tribe that a Black American person would descend from, mainly because the groups of people from before, which I understand this, right, but the groups of people from before are not the same as the people today. So all it can do is compare you to the people today. So, for example, you could be a Black American person, you take a DNA test, and it says that you have DNA that's similar to people from the region of what is modern-day Nigeria. But the ethnic group or tribal breakdown of the people that's in Nigeria right now, it's not the same as the people that was in that region before. So all that it can do is compare you to people that's alive today, right? Which I've heard other brothers say. They said it can only compare you to people from the past. It can't compare you to people that's around today, right? Now, as far as comparing to people that's around today, and Black American people talking about having indigenous ancestry from early 1900s, 1800s, 1700s, this is where the main problem is coming into play with indigenous ancestry. Because black Americans, right, and their indigenous ancestry is not something that happened today or yesterday, whatever. It's something that happened centuries ago. So as it's comparing you to people from around the world today, it's not going to say that you are connected to the people that are called indigenous Americans now, because you're talking about something that happened centuries and centuries ago. A lot of brothers are pulling out these old pictures of depictions made of indigenous people from the 1800s, the 1700s, the 1600s, the 1500s, right? And then even stuff that, like artifacts that go back to like 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. And people are saying, why can't we take a DNA test now and compare it to the people? Why can't we take a DNA test now and get the results as indigenous American people? That's because we are not genetically the same. Like, for example, right, I descend from Muskogee and Miccosukee, or Seminole peoples, right, from the 1800s, all the way back during the Seminole Wars. They got the Indian Removal Act. They get brought to places like Texas and Oklahoma. So the people, right, the people that's over there now in Florida, and what they've been doing for the past over 100 years, and even the group that's over there in Oklahoma, Wewoka, Oklahoma, Seminole County, right, they're not going to be the same as me right now, right? They're not even going to be the same as my dad. That's come from my dad's family. My mom's from Barbados, right? But it's not going to be the same because you're comparing DNA. Now, the question is now, right? If black American people are indigenous, why is it that they're getting DNA results, right? Looking like, let me pull this up. Gotta pull this up on the other slide. Right. Why are they getting DNA results that look like this? Right? So, and I should have screenshot, but it was Nigeria's at the top, right? They get Benin and Togo 16%, Mali 15%, England, and they start getting, European breakdowns, right? It's saying that we have DNA, certain amount of our DNA, right, is like this people now in Nigeria, there's people now today in Mali, there's people now today in Ireland, there's people now today in England, and it's broken up like that, right? And you have even people that they took the DNA test like 10 years ago, and when they first took it, right, their results were looking like something like 25 to 30% Native American DNA. But over the past 10 years, right, they took it again, and what do they get? They get like about 2%. Some people get none. The question is, what happened? And the answer for why that people's stuff is disappearing is because the indigenous communities, what they DNA looking like, what they genetics looking like, has changed over the past 10 years in that region. Just like how back, like, let me say about like 15 years ago, people taking a DNA test 10 years ago, most people weren't getting Nigeria at the top. You can't see it, but at the top, but it's Benin and Togo, which is this dude's main DNA. It says it's like the people in Nigeria. But before, people weren't getting Nigeria like that. But nowadays, it's like every single black American, Haitian, whatever, that takes the DNA test, the main African percentage is saying Nigeria. But it wasn't doing that before, right? That's two things you're seeing. You're seeing that the indigenous, right, as far as indigenous DNA or indigenous populations, that DNA is disappearing in black American people. But Nigerian ancestry and Nigerian DNA is increasing, meaning that the people that's in Nigeria right now, somehow, right, whatever is going on in that country, their DNA, as in today, is becoming more similar to the black American people. And the people from these indigenous communities, like the Seminole Nation of Florida and Oklahoma, like the Shinnecock Nation, like the Cherokee Nation, right? Like the Shoshone Nation, like the Cree Nation, like the Lakota, the Oglala, right? The Abenaki peoples, the Micmac peoples. These people's DNA is becoming further away from us. And now, whatever DNA that you had that was similar to the people that was there 10 years ago, their DNA is not quite like that. So, the DNA, what we're seeing is, for example, right? With that example, what I'm trying to say is, as Black Americans have such a low amount of indigenous ancestry popping up in the DNA test, it doesn't seem like that's because of any intermixing. That seems like over time in these indigenous communities, their DNA is becoming less and less familiar. Right? Their DNA is becoming less and less familiar to the Black American people because a person DNA ain't changing by itself. And you like, I didn't reproduce with anybody to make no child. I took the DNA test 2010. And it gave me a 25%. Then I took it again in 2022. And it's gone. Your DNA didn't change, right? You didn't might intermarry with anything to make that go away. What happened was the people in these Indian nations, right? And as they're doing like going into those people's genetics, their DNA is not like what it was 10 years ago. Because of where you live at. You don't live in these indigenous communities or anything like that. And that's now making me think, okay, so people, Black American person taking the DNA test and not getting indigenous ancestry is just based off of the fact that mainly they are not related to the people that's over there now. Not that these people are not indigenous and they don't have indigenous ancestry. So let me give you another example, right? Which was odd to me. Let me pull this up. This dude, right, is an Ethiopian. Now, as you know, when you're doing with the DNA test, as far as African ancestry, it can tell you if somebody has Malian DNA, if they got Ethiopian DNA, if they got Djibouti, Eritrea, Kenya, Somalia, right? So, right off the bat, this dude don't look much different than the average Somali person. But he's an Ethiopian. And the DNA test can detect that he is a Ethiopian, right? Family just came from Ethiopia, right? I think he's one of them anchor babies that was born down here, right? United States. But it can tell the difference between him and a Somali dude that look the same. Because the specifics as far as the people that's over there now and what's going on in that part of the world, right? So, if it could tell that this dude's Ethiopian and somebody else that looks just like this is Somali, why can't it tell the tribe? That's what this thing's trying to tell you, right? Hold on. That's what this is trying to tell you. So, I'm like, okay. So this ain't necessarily about intermarrying or intermixing that's making certain DNA dwindle down. It's just where you are. Because, for example, right? If you take this dude, and let's say he lives in the United States. He has kids with an Ethiopian woman, right? All the way down to, like, his grandkids. So, let's say we go forth in the future. This dude and his family only been reproducing with other Ethiopians that are over here, right? Basically, what will happen is, after about a century of this dude and his Ethiopian community and him reproducing with other Ethiopian women and then the grandkids and everything, they're not intermixing with any white people, any Black Americans, nothing. But the fact that they were over here so long, and then, you know, whatever would go on in Ethiopia and Eritrea, Somali region, but mainly Ethiopia this century, would make it to where is that this dude's descendants' DNA would not be quite like the people that's in Ethiopia a century from now. But not that this dude and his family started reproducing with non-Ethiopian peoples whilst they was over here. The grandkids' DNA would just be unfamiliar because they've been out of that region for so long. So then I'm thinking to myself, okay, we know, right, that, and I might split this into two because I don't know why all my features is locked, right? But we know that we've had cases where that black people, right, Negroes, right, black people in the Americas, plus the United States, they have been forcefully removed and kicked out of these Indian nations and these indigenous communities. We literally talking about hundreds of thousands of people. Hundreds of thousands of families that have been kicked out of these indigenous Indian nations, right, and so forth. starting in the late 1800s all the way to the late 1900s. Because they was even still doing this stuff in the 80s and the 90s too. So I'm like, okay, so the Black American people's DNA, right? Black American people's DNA is not going to be similar to the people that's over there now. Because these people, family has been long removed and associated with those people. So now we got to go deeper into the DNA test, right? And we have to now go into, like, matter of fact, not even just the DNA test. We are going to the haplotypes. So the haplotypes, right, is basically how that groups of people's DNA is on this earth, right? And I'm going to do this in a part 2, right? I'm going to come back. Let me save this right quick. Right, let me see this.